This is one of our Vet Virtual Lounge series, and we've done, I think, 4 or 5 of these. They're different topics. We try to gear them toward what student veterans might want to learn more about in terms of enhancing their learning or keeping stress levels down, better sleep. So we have 2 presenters today from the post-deployment and readjustment program. We have Maureen Modi McDonald and Emily Mayer, and a special thank you to Dr. Nancy Brand, who always collaborates with us and gets us some great presenters to bring you new information. So today's topic is capitalizing on your learning style. And as we've mentioned, there's a VARC questionnaire, which sort of is a very brief 10-minute questionnaire, gives you your learning preferences. And then what they explain today is going to show you how that matters in terms of courses you take, the learning platform that you might be in, whether it's in person or online, how you study, how you retain information, how you may work in groups in terms of an academic setting. So really cool information. It was fun to put this together because it's something that I feel like everyone would benefit from learning a little bit about. So having said that, I will turn it over to our 2 presenters.
Thank you so much. So I am Dr. Modi McDonald. In another life, I was a time management and organization coach, which is how I sort of learned about VARC. And I'm really excited to sort of talk about that with you guys today.
Hi, and I'm Dr. Emily Mayer. I'm going to be kind of taking the second half of today's presentation. I'm not a time management and organization coach in any lifetime, but I've, like many of you, had to figure this stuff out. And I have some other stuff that I think is very much related to this that I'm going to be sharing towards the end of the presentation.
Okay, to talk about sort of the agenda for today. So we're going to start with VARC and talking about the optimal way that you study, really utilizing your learning preference and the resources you have, some of the barriers that might get in the way, mental, physical, learning issues that can be either related or not related to your time in the service. And we will take a brief 5-minute break between this section and the next. Because what I know about our brains is that we can really only pay attention for about 40 to 50 minutes, and then we need to give them a break. So we'll take about a 5-minute break, probably at the top of the hour, and then going to figuring out what matters to you. Your values, increasing your self-awareness, promoting success, some of the challenges to doing those things, especially in school, related to juggling really competing priorities like, family and working in addition to going to school. So that's a general sort of like framework for what we're going to be talking about today. In terms of you guys, as Micaela said, like, please ask questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible so you get the most out of it. Pause, unmute yourself, put it in the chat. We'd like you to get as much out of this as possible. And just listening to me talk, unless you're an oral learner, which we'll talk about, won't be nearly as beneficial than asking questions and sharing your thoughts. So getting into VARC. So what is VARC? So it identifies what study style you prefer and provides strategies that really align with that style. It's not about your strengths or what you like to do for leisure. So you may be a kinesthetic learner and really low on visual. It doesn't mean you don't like to paint or draw. It's really just about your study style and the best way to incorporate information into your brain. It's about learning. So it really focuses on like how you learn best. So if you took the VARC questionnaire and you were like, oh yes, that makes sense, I really learn best, when I see things visual, hopefully that was your reaction, like, yes. If it didn't feel like it really fit your style, I'd encourage you to go back and retake it. Sometimes we answer for what we've done and not necessarily what we prefer or, what we've seen other strategies that work for someone else. But it really should feel like, that makes sense. I remember in this class, I learned really well this way. So it's really about helping you figure out like, wow, this is how I learn best. So that's what VARC is. So next slide, thank you. So if you just want to like raise your hand in the chat, were you able to take it before this? Oh, good. So I'm seeing a couple raised hands. Great. That will make this make a lot more sense and be helpful. If you didn't have a chance to take it, it's in the chat, and you'll be able to take it after. If anyone wants to share, were there surprises? Were there things that you already knew? What was it like for you to take that questionnaire?
I'll say that it was interesting. The questions were interesting for me because I had such a distinct reaction to some of them. Like, oh, building something without having like directions or just things that I know that I'm not good at, that I was like, ew, that's hard. And then other things that I was like, oh yeah, I would love to discuss that and have a conversation about something I learned with other people. So yeah, it was pretty neat the questions were not what I expected, but it was neat.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, to sort of be like, oh, I didn't think about how that might relate to how I learn.
Personally, sorry, who we got talking first? You can go ahead.
No, that's fine.
By the way, hey Rob, good to see you. Everybody, my name's not actually Bruno. I just can't figure out how to change it in the settings. So I just want to establish my name's Mark and I'm from Bristol Community College. But what it helped mainly was I had to take it twice because I closed the page and my answers were pretty much the same going through both times, and it solidified that I was a visual learner as well as like a hands-on learner, which it was like extra verification, which was kind of nice. So it was interesting for sure.
Thanks, Bruno. I didn't realize that I couldn't or that I could select multiple at first, so that I went back and reread the questions. But I never selected that I liked to read any of the instructions or anything. And then when I was done, I'm a multimodal, I guess. But then it had everything else where I had to read. So I kind of didn't like that. I wished I had like a different type of instructional format there, but that's about it.
Yeah, it's hard if you're not, a reading and writing learner, and yet the questionnaire sort of plays towards that.
I'm in the same boat as everybody else. I really don't like to read. I do like to write. So instead of reading, what I do is I download like Speechify and take a picture of it and have it, because I'm doing so many other things. I like to listen. I like if there's an audiobook version of it, I also rather do that. If it's narrated or it's like storytelling, I feel like I grasp better. I can better understand the information. But definitely visual and kinesthetic learner.
And it sounds like you got a little bit of the oral learner, like listening and the audiobook piece. Awesome. Okay, so visual, for those who are visual learners, or if you're multimodal, and this popped up pretty high. So I should specify, I am not a visual learner. I am an oral learner. So I learn by listening and talking, which we'll talk about. So this was my best effort at creating something that was visually appealing for someone who's not a visual learner. So really for visual learners, what's really helpful is using different fonts, different colors, highlighting your notes, using pictures, graphs, and charts. Like that's the best way that you'll sort of intake information. Really looking for patterns. And then this reduced notes from a 3-to-1 ratio. So what that looks like is, let's say a professor shares like a study guide, or you took notes during class. For you to then really learn that information, the best thing that you can do is take like 3 pages of notes and make it into one using charts, using graphs, and really condense that, because you'll want to be able to see it quickly and have it all sort of on one page rather than reading through a ton of material. This will really allow you to sort of transfer the information into a way that makes sense. And in terms of your notes, because some things don't transfer super well from, notes into a chart. Something like, remembering, dates goes really well into a chart, but some things don't. Oh, can you go back? Sorry. So when it doesn't transfer really well into a chart, a picture, a graph, when you write your notes, use different colored pens or highlighters, to sort of make it more visually appealing. And then you'll be able to almost picture in your brain as you're, taking a test, like, oh, I can picture that differently because I wrote it in pink ink than, this other thing that I wrote in blue or black, and it'll help your mind sort of differentiate different information. Now can we, yeah, perfect. So what are some of the ways that you can do that without, spending hours of your life rewriting notes and using different colored inks? One is use those in class when you're writing the notes, but also things like PowerPoint, YouTube, and Kavana, which I only saw and found when I was building this presentation. They have a ton of visual tools. And YouTube is great. Often you'll see YouTube come up in most of the learning styles because it, often people will condense information into like a 3-minute clip with graphics. And, I was just studying for a big exam and there were cartoons and different things that made it a lot more visually appealing. Are there things that, so for those who maybe are more on the visual scale, are there things that you've used or tried or have worked for you in terms of making things more visually appealing?
For me, the color thing works really well. And then also for like the font, like sometimes I'll make like a little key chart because like some to make like words smaller. And so I'll make like a little chart for what they put on the side. So then like it looks like I don't know what the right word is, but like I'll put like a little key. So like when I abbreviate, I know what the word is. And then that way I can write faster because there's always those teachers who like speak as fast as humanly possible and then they like move on. So like sometimes you got to cut your writing down. So I do that a lot and that helps like with that. And if you can record sometimes, or you have like the auto recorder that like captures it, what the teacher's saying, and then you can just like highlight it as you go. That also makes it easier.
I love that key idea. And you're right, there are a lot of people that go really, really fast.
Yeah, and I agree about the highlighting. I had a whole like multicolored highlighting system. I would highlight certain types of information one color and different types another color, just so that every page looked different. And I'd remember what the page I'm looking for looked like.
That's awesome. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So I'm sorry, I was just going to say, I love these ideas. I love the key. I do the same thing with color coding. And then I do remember what page I saw it on as well. And then we have a comment in the chat that is a visual color coded coupled with hands-on approach. So I think a lot of people probably fall in that multimodal learning style, right?
Absolutely. And that actually is much better in terms of like, you have a lot more options in terms of how you learn. But I love the idea. I also, though I'm not a visual learner, I love color coded pens and things. And you're right. I think that, and I'm like, oh, I remember I wrote that in, blue ink, and let me look for the blue ink page. anything to sort of help it get encoded into your long-term memory. And then PowerPoint, like as you can see based on this, there's a lot of different things that you can do in PowerPoint. And then we're going to transition to oral learning. And hopefully I embedded this correctly. Oh,
Hang on a second. Can anyone hear that?
I can't.
It's being kind of weird. Can you hear it now?
No.
You have to enable
Okay.
the audio when you share screen.
Oh, technology.
Yeah, you might have to stop sharing and then reshare.
Okay. Let me at least get it to the right point here because we were starting at 27 seconds. And all right. I'm not seeing the option to do that. Like in advanced sharing options, I'm not seeing an option to enable audio. Does anyone know?
It should actually just be on the border, if I can remember correctly. I mean, I haven't had to do it in a minute, but when I initially hit the share screen, it was like an option at the bottom of the,
Okay.
the window that pulls up.
Yep, I think I see it. Let's try this.
Oral learners learn best by hearing information. They tend to get a great deal out of lectures and are good at remembering things they are told. Listening, speaking, music, storytelling, discussion and verbal instructions work well for oral learners. Read and write learners prefer to take in information displayed in words.
So in terms of oral learners, so I like this. This is called Sweat Without Tears, is how I learned it. It can also mean strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and tools. Oh, a lot of binging. So the best way for an oral learner to really encode information and learn information is to listen and talk it out. So something that would be a weakness would be, presentation's getting, there we go. Oh, struggle is real. So strengths would be listening and talking, reading notes out loud to yourself, even recording yourself, reading notes out loud, or recording lectures can be really helpful for oral learners. A weakness would be any classes that are asynchronous, because then there's no opportunity to ask questions, to engage in discussion. So it can be really difficult for oral learners when, especially during COVID, a lot of classes became asynchronous, where it was just like, watch it on your own time. Opportunities, things that will really help oral learners are office hours. If your professor has an office hour, go talk to them for a number of reasons. First, it's a chance for you to ask questions. Often they will give you hints on what will be coming up on the test or what they're looking for in papers. So this can be a helpful tip for any type of learner. And then study groups, either formal or informal, and what we call reverse tutoring. So that's like if you have a tutor, rather than them teaching you the information or after they teach you the information, you teach it back to them. And that really ensures that you have learned and that you're able to talk it out in a really helpful way. So tools are Audible. So I think it was Alex. I'm sorry if that wasn't who said it. But like Audible textbooks, being able to listen to the chapter, the readings, YouTube, podcasts, all of those are really helpful for our learners. Anything, that someone who's an R learner has tried and found really work for them.
I like to, okay, I don't like to, but I do read my notes out loud. I just feel like that, you know, kind of drives it home more for some reason. I don't like recording myself though. Study groups, I didn't put a lot of weight on those up until like this year. And I found that this year they've been kind of ridiculously helpful, especially when, you know, you have a good mix of students that either that understand the topics that, you know, your professor's teaching. And if you're like kind of behind, they really help you catch up or get up to speed on more of a like a peer-to-peer basis rather than, you know, with the professor. And then I can also say too, like Audible has saved my life when it comes to like reading. I've had classes who like they just assign 5 like novels to read in per the semester, and it's ridiculous, but that's the only way I can keep pace. I either listen to it while I'm doing something else, or I listen to it and I read at the same time.
I love that. I love listening to it and reading it, like just really integrating the information. That's awesome. And yeah, study groups. And I think study groups can be really great if you don't want to meet with the professor, because sometimes that can feel kind of like pressure. But even for those of you also with, you know, family or friends, you know, talking it out, you know, being able to talk about it to someone who doesn't have any idea about the information can be really helpful, because they can ask really important questions like, oh, I didn't even realize I didn't know that, or that I do know that, which was even more fun.
Modi, in line with what Rob was just saying, and I think Josh said it earlier, there's a device called a smart pen, which is basically like a modern day recorder. And I've had lots of vets who use those in the classroom and then play back certain parts of a lecture. So if it's a part that they really struggled with, or it was really complex, you know, they can even listen in the car while they're doing dishes. Like we're all doing lots of different things. So if anyone's never heard of a smart pen or wants more information about how they're able to use it in class, definitely let me know. I can send you kind of the standard issue one that I often recommend, and then explain how you're allowed to use them in class as well. They're super, super like a game changer for a lot of students.
No, you just reminded me that when I was an organization and time management coach, I used to recommend those pens, and they would often, you know, if it could be a part of their accommodations if they were connected to DSS, and they'd get it for free, and a really cool way of writing notes and translating those into audio. So yeah, those are awesome. I was often jealous of the students that had them because I did not. Okay, so on to reading and writing. So this is really the way most classes are set up. So like, as Rob mentioned, like sometimes they'll just assign 5 novels, which feels like a lot. And most schools and classes are usually set up for reading and writing learners. You know, a lot of teachers will use lists and bullet points. They'll assign chapters, articles. So to take in that information, if you're that kind of learner, that's really helpful. So you want to be writing really detailed notes, reread them and rewrite them. If there's something that's visual, you actually want to do the opposite of what a visual learner would do. And you want to break that down and really write out what that chart, what that diagram means for you to really be able to take that information in. Tools that are really helpful for reading and writing learners are Word documents, Google Scholar to find additional information, additional articles. Flashcards are your friend, and so is Quizlet. And I actually like Quizlet for a lot of different reasons. You can develop practice tests, you can actually have them speak out loud to you, so they can be good for oral learners. They can be good for visual learners, but they're really good for reading and writing learners. Has Quizlet or any of these been things that people have used? I didn't find out about it until like my last year of grad school, which was sad.
For Quizlet, there's been people in some of my classes where they make it up for us as like a group study guide, and then we all kind of like just use that and we share it and then add it and subtract things.
That's awesome. And so nice that you guys have, you know, that support and send it out to each other.
I love Quizlet because, you know, it'll have both, you know, prepared stuff so other people will have it, and it's like either exactly what you're looking for, or you can create your own, which is, you know, awesome.
And that process of creating your own can also be a really helpful study piece of, you know, going through and figuring out like what information is really important that I want to learn, and can help, especially, you know, for those visual ones who need to reduce it from 3 to 1, you know, and really highlight the most important things. All right, so that's reading and writing. And then kinesthetic. So these are for those who really like to do things with their hands. So when you're taking information, you want to use as many senses as you can get involved. So videos for, you know, listening and seeing, exhibits. So, you know, going to museums, going to, you know, labs and field trips, like any way to really involve yourself in the material. Often learning by trial and error. So like, oh, let me try to manipulate this thing and see if that worked. Like, oh, that didn't work. But, you know, it would have worked if I had done it this way. You want to look for case studies and real life examples. And that will really make it like real. And you can sort of in your mind picture yourself there. What would I see? What would I hear? What would I smell? Role playing with other students is really helpful, because again, you're involving multiple senses and you're getting really hands-on and involved in the material. And then learning in context. And I like this because there's this piece of learning that we know that if we learn it when we're in that sort of state, we're more likely to remember it. So like going to the lab and really studying there can be really helpful. So then when you're taking the test, you're like, oh yes, I was here. I remember I was hearing this or seeing this or smelling this. It's called state-dependent learning. So anything you can do. So YouTube will be really helpful because that'll usually involve our sight and our listening. Smell is sometimes the hardest one to get really involved, unless you're in like chem. The other thing that can be really helpful is looking at previous exams, either your own, so, you know, in a 16-week semester, let's say if you have an exam every other week, look at past exams, because that'll help you remember like, oh, you know, this is how they ask questions. So I need to make sure, you know, this is how I learn the information. And then you want to use pictures and illustrations that really highlight an abstract idea. So that can be the hardest sort of piece for kinesthetic learners, is bringing the abstract into the concrete. So finding different ways of doing that is really trying to make it as concrete and as real as something that you can handle almost. So 3D models can be really helpful. And I have this little, it's supposed to be like a, like a DNA gene piece, but those can be incredibly helpful for classes like chemistry, where you have to learn different molecules. And the best thing you can do is like build those elements, those molecules, and that'll really involve like, oh, I'm doing it, I'm figuring it out with my hands. If it's a history class, like see about finding a museum or something that, you know, sort of gears towards that period of time. Be like, oh, you know, I remember that statue of this really famous person, and that helps you solidify the material. It's one of the learning styles that schools aren't really set up to support. So it ends up being a lot of doing things and figuring out what works for you on your own. As I said before, like reading and writing is really helpful. Learners in school, because that's how they're set up, but kinesthetic can be really hard. For those of you who were kinesthetic learners, are there things that you found really help that you've done? Or are any of these things you've tried and they haven't worked?
Like for me, oh, sorry, go ahead, ma'am. You can go first.
No, you go, James.
All right. I find like I don't know the difference between, I just joined, but I find what helps me, like I actually take like really, really detailed notes, like from the books and from all the learning sources. And like I actually absorb it more. I have like ADHD, so like, you know, like if I'm sitting there and I'm just trying to read it, I won't absorb anything. So I have to actually literally write every single thing down, and I add my own annotations, like squares for stuff, you know what I mean? Or like a star for something I need to remember, you know? So I just find that helps a lot. I don't know what learning style that is. I'm sorry, I joined the call late.
That's okay, but yeah, that sounds like really making it, you know, specific to you and getting involved in the material. You know, and that can be really hard if you're struggling with like, you know, hearing everything and attending to that information. You know, so using your own little key, as I think Josh mentioned before. And sorry, Nancy, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment that I tested out as being kinesthetic, and I think when I was much younger, that was not the case. And I think for those of us that go back to school after having done, I mean, everybody here is a veteran, and I think a lot of military training is more focused on maybe kinesthetic learning. And so it might mean that going back to school maybe is especially challenging if you're learning, you know, if there's more book learning or more visual or reading and writing. And I find that as I've gotten older, this is the more appropriate learning for me. And sometimes it's already, it's hard to learn if you don't have some of these ways of learning available for whatever it is that you're trying to, whatever information you're trying to take in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, even like for, oh, sorry. Go ahead. Who's going to talk? Sorry.
Go ahead, James.
All right. Like I was going to say, like even for like the math, I think math's like the hardest thing for me. But like I found that like, you know, those Pearson online courses they have, I spoke with my voc rehab counselor, and like, I used that to supplement the classes. Cause you know, when you're in class, the professor's like writing everything like down and you're like taking notes, and I don't absorb any of it. So I have to go back and then go through the Pearson class, and I write every single lesson they have, like literally like word for word, you know, and then I like, so that helps me. Like I can't learn in class, like math especially, you know.
I gotta say, YouTube has been like a savior for a lot of things for me. So James, you might want to try like using YouTube, especially for math, because if one professor or somebody's like showing you one way and it's really not making sense, jumping over to YouTube sometimes and basically like just typing in what you're looking for, they'll give you like 20 different ways to do it, basically doing it the same way, but like explaining it differently, using different words. Like that thing, I gotta say, YouTube saved my life for like oh my God, statistics. I hate statistics, but YouTube, it saved me for that. I think I got like an A in that class just because of YouTube.
Roger. I did the same thing for like I didn't want to sound like it was cheating or anything, but I would use the YouTube for my economics class. You know, so I was
Oh
like,
yeah, definitely.
yeah. So that comes in handy as well.
I was gonna say they have something called Symbol Lab or Photo Math too, where it's like you can kind of, I'm not saying it's cheating because if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying, but you can scan the problem for the most part, and it gives you a step-by-step breakdown. That's how I learn is like, this is step one, do that like 100 times and keep going until you actually get the problem yourself. So that's how I pass like calculus and everything like that.
Yeah, that's that army way to do something 1,000 times to become proficient in it.
And stick figure pictures.
I think also a good resource through Voc Rehab that I used was Tutor, and we would through Zoom we would be able to like write it out and show. So she already had like a camera set up, like an overhead camera and everything. And she walked me through like the steps. She's like, okay, do this now, and do you see why? And it was almost like the role play with another student, but with a tutor. You know, you were able to get instant feedback on what you were doing right or wrong. Because for me, sometimes I've tried Mathways and all these other. I didn't feel like I was actually learning it because I don't like to read. I'm more of a visual and just trying it on the spot and trying to do it. So having somebody there to help me, like I also was a mechanic, so YouTube was also a great resource. I was able to go out there and physically like change bolts and change parts and figure things out and see how they work, take them apart and have extra bolts and never put them back together the right way. So those were all learning experiences.
Piggybacking off of what Alex just said, you know, tutors, they are great. I found that I have a better outcome when I get like adult tutors or like professors instead of the other students, because I feel like, I mean, maybe it's just me, but I also feel like, you know, some of those students are a little bit timid around us. You know, we're older and whatnot, and they don't really kind of like, I don't know if they just don't want to say, you know, or they feel weird instructing somebody older or something. But when I work with professors, they're just like, no, and they can, you know, this is how you do it. They instruct you very differently than like a peer-to-peer would. So with those tutors, I would totally jump on with if they have professor options, you know, take that up.
Absolutely. I think tutoring is, you know, so helpful to just like really hear the information, often in a different way than the professor probably taught you. And sometimes that's like, you know, I didn't learn it the way the professor explained it, but like this tutor is really helpful. And also in addition to YouTube, and I think their videos are mostly on YouTube at this point, but Khan Academy can be really helpful for math. And actually, I saw a bunch of stuff for, you know, psychology there. I just took a really big exam yesterday, and a lot of my studying came from Khan Academy and YouTube. So that can also be really helpful. But yeah, any way to sort of make the material your own is the best way you'll learn. And then for the next one, I think that's our multimodal learners. Yes. So for this sort of learning style, it's really helpful to sort of look at your highest learning style. So for those of us, and then I just use myself as an example. So I'm high on oral learning and reading and writing. So you want to combine things. So I would want to rewrite and reread my notes aloud. You can use YouTube videos. You can even create your own YouTube videos or your own videos. So you want to look at the strategies that you were, or the learning preferences that you were highest on, and then sort of try and find a mix of those. What mix really makes sense? So if you're really high on visual and oral, then like videos will be your best friend. You know, if you are high on kinesthetic, you know, you want to figure out a way to, you know, make it your own in terms of like 3D models, while also if you're high on oral, like listening to the lecture, listening to the information. But most of all, it's really about finding what works for you. You know, there are tons of options for each learning style, and it's finding like what combination works for you. And also for that particular subject, it's really hard to sort of figure out like, oh, this really works for me when I'm learning history. And I need to remember dates and names, you know, flashcards, like that's what I got to do. But for biology, what I got to do is I have to go and, you know, go to the lab and really do trial and error and more kinesthetic. So there's pieces of this that will go throughout, you know, all different classes in terms of like how you take notes and how you engage in lectures. But then there are pieces of this that are very class dependent. And I can't go into every class and what you should do. But, oh, Denny, is your hand raised?
If I remember when I was in college, I remember hearing something about a focus cone. So even maybe where you sit in the classroom determines how much you're going to retain. Like, obviously, if you're sitting in the front of class, have you heard of anything like that, or is that like outdated information? Like those that sit in the front of the class are more invested and engaged, so they retain better than someone sits in the back. And if you sit more in the center than off to the sides, is that substantiated by science, or is that just outdated hearsay?
So I don't have the research at this moment to back it up, but I think there's a lot to be said for that, especially thinking about like, do you get distracted easily? Sitting in the back of the class is the worst place for you. You'll be able to see what everyone else is doing, and that's going to constantly pull your attention to any movement, anything that's happening. So if you're someone like, wow, I get distracted really easily, like I need to be sitting in towards the front of the class with less distractions. Sometimes that can be really hard if there's any sort of, you know, like for veterans, a lot of times there's some trauma there, and like sitting with people behind you is really hard. So figuring out like, okay, I need to sit in the back in the corner, but on the side of the professor, so that at least most of my attention can be on the professor. And so, yeah, where you sit during lectures is huge. And sorry, you were going to add something.
I think you already said it too, like any kind of combat related stress or trauma, they're going to want to try to be closer to the exit, which is normally in the back of the classroom. So they want to be kind of not vulnerable when they're choosing their class seat. That first, like the first 5 minutes of that first class on syllabus day. So they kind of self-segregate themselves to the back. But yeah, I think that's just kind of a natural progress for veterans, and also the, you know, imposter phenomenon and not feeling adequate, so being even more vulnerable on top of that. But I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. I please feel free to interrupt. I prefer when it's a conversation. But, you know, and this is where we'll touch on some of the things that can get in the way of, you know, optimal learning. And so really being aware of like, okay, what are the things that are going to get in the way in terms of me being able to attend to class? So if it's, you know, I'm going to feel really anxious or on guard, you know, and it's going to be really hard to attend to the information, you know, what resources do I have? Okay, so I need to record the lectures because maybe in the moment it's going to be really hard for me to take that information in, but actually after class it'll be really helpful. But it's important that I show up to class because I want the professor to know that I care. So sort of finding, you know, that balance that really works for you. Any reactions, any thoughts before we move on to more of that in terms of multimodal learning? Okay. So it would be kind of like ignoring the elephant in the room if I didn't talk about how COVID and online learning impacts these learning styles, because that has been a huge part of our lives for the past over 2 years. And I know some schools are going back more in person and some are still having the online option, and some schools are totally online. So thinking about like, oh, what kind of learner am I? And how does online learning impact that when I'm thinking about signing up for classes? You know, do I really want, or do I need a class that's in person? So if you're a reading and writing learner, the difference between in-person and online will be really low impact. So usually if the teacher's material translates really well into an online class, a lot of times it's the same readings, same textbook, same notes. So if that's more your learning style, you know, online learning is still a great option. Visual, also kind of low impact in terms of the difference between being in class and online. PowerPoints are how most, at least from what I know, most professors teach. Again, this is class dependent. So like chemistry, I'm imagining is really hard for anyone to do online. Although I'm sure they find a way to make it work. But visuals are really easily shared online. So if you're more of a visual learner, online can be a great option. Oral learners. Now this surprised me a little bit, that there can be a really big impact on the difference between online versus in person for oral learners. But actually it's because it's really difficult to ask questions, engage in discussions. Sometimes it can be really difficult to get to know your classmates, to even have those sort of informal study groups, or find a study partner. So if you're more on the oral learner side, online learning, especially if it's asynchronous, can be really hard. Now there's, you know, always options to sort of still make it work. Go to online office hours. A lot of professors still have that. Ask if you can connect via Zoom. I know, you know, online study groups still happen, and actually those happen more regularly because lives are busy. So certainly, like, it's not like you can't do online learning if you're an oral learner. You may just have to be more intentional about how you're studying and taking in the information, and aware of, you know, the ways in which, like, you might lose out. Like, oh, is this a subject or is this material I know I'm really going to struggle with? So like for me, math, yikes. I would know I need, you know, at least a synchronous class, at least an in-person. And when I say asynchronous, I mean like those classes that are recorded and there's no, like, we meet on Tuesdays at 2. So like for math, I would know, like, I need at least a class that has set times that I have a chance to ask questions.
I like those classes too, because you go at your own pace too, kind of.
Yeah. So there are definitely trade-offs, like, you know, for especially with busy lives. And I know Emily's going to talk a lot about, you know, juggling different things. But figuring out, like, okay, is the trade-off like I get to watch the lectures over and over again, and actually that really helps because I'm an oral learner, but it means I don't get to ask questions. So certainly it's pros and cons figuring out what works for you. Kinesthetic, big impact in between online and in class, in-person classes. It's also difficult to have labs and engage in multisensory activities. So especially during the height of COVID, you know, museums and you know, places like gardens, if you're doing biology or anything like that, a lot of them were closed. So again, office hours, you will hear me talk about office hours. You're probably already sick of it. But those are your best friend. For a number of reasons. It helps the professor get to know you, which means that they're probably more likely to remember you and write you a letter of recommendation if you ever need one. And if they know you're really trying in the material and it's not that you're not doing the homework, they're also more likely to give you better grades. Okay, so has anyone?
Sorry.
No.
I just wanted to jump in briefly on this topic because it's something that comes up so often now with the online versus on campus. And I think, I don't want to scare anyone because I feel like when COVID started, what was happening is classes that were supposed to be on campus had to be shoved online unexpectedly. So if anyone's here that struggled through COVID and is trying to return to school or left and is thinking about coming back, it's already different because I think either professors have gotten better at taking content and moving it online, or they've realized like certain classes just really, like Modi said, they really should be in person. It's not a great learning experience. I know at the start of COVID, I was teaching a course myself and had to move it online. And it was a lot of work to take the content that I would have done in person because it was a very like discussion oriented type of course and move it to this Zoom virtual environment and still do discussions, but keep everyone interacting. And it was like a 3-hour class and that's a long time to be staring at each other on Zoom. So my point is you guys have a choice too. So when you're registering for classes, think about the things we're learning here today. How do you learn best? What's the best platform for you? Are there certain courses, like Modi said, math is not her subject, not mine either. Like I am not taking an online math class. I want to sit in front of someone and ask questions and see things on the board. So you have a choice there. And most of our schools have priority registration for student veterans. Take advantage of that, get in classes early so that you can pick a schedule that works for you. Don't take a 3-hour class if you start to get mentally fatigued. Don't take an online class in a certain subject if that's not a good match for you. So, take some ownership there and try to take charge of what you're learning here today about your style so that academically you're setting yourself up for success each semester.
Absolutely. No, that's so true. Like just in terms of like figuring out like what actually will work for you. What am I willing to trade off like 3 hours? And I have heard that this professor doesn't give us breaks and I struggle with attention. Like that is not going to be a good class. That's going to be torture. So thinking about like what really works for me, and especially with priority registration, use that. That's such a helpful thing.
I just wanted to add that it might be helpful for folks, there may be classes that they have to take online because that's what they need to meet a requirement for graduation in their major. And it might be, figuring out, okay, given that, what else do you need to have working in your life to make that more manageable? I know, for example, a lot of folks decide to take that math class that they dread, maybe not with, with some other classes that are not as intensive, or maybe take fewer classes. So that's something that I know for a lot of the student veterans that I work with that have found that helpful.
Oh, going back to that thing about how professors, each one has a different teaching style and stuff like that. I had a fellow veteran over at RIC at the Military Resource Center, and like she was helping me pick classes for the next semester. And she put me onto this thing. I forget the name of the website, but I think it was like Rate My Professor or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get a lot of insight on the teaching style and stuff like that. And if they're pretty lenient or,
And in terms of that, like if there's a class or a subject that you struggle with, but your school is only teaching it online, but the community college or another college in the area is teaching it in person. A lot of times schools will accept a transfer of credits. That can be an option. Or actually, I'm going to take that math class over the summer when I don't have a full, course load, because then I know I'll be able to really put the attention that it needs so that I'll pass. So I know people that they're like, I really struggle in Spanish, or languages or math. And so I took that at the local community college because, you know, over the summer, because then I could devote the attention to it that it needed. Okay, so that's impact of online learning. So here's where I like almost couldn't give a presentation on VARC without also adding some of my, you know, time management and organization strategies that I learned as a coach. So figuring out, like, are you someone that needs a deadline? You know I am. If there's no deadline, I won't do it until I absolutely have to. You know, create a weekly schedule. Even if you don't like being beholden to a schedule, do it once so you at least see the breaks of time that you have available. So when I've done this with students in the past, it's like, wow, I didn't realize I have 2 hours between my classes. Like, what am I even doing in those 2 hours? And then you can set up that time of like, okay, I'm gonna make sure I study for at least one of those 2 hours. Because sometimes you'll look at your schedule and be like, wow, I have so much more time and I don't know where it's going. I cannot stress enough, take each syllabus and add each assignment and test into your calendar. Now I know, and it drives me nuts when professors do this, a lot of times they'll change assignments or due dates, but it'll at least remind you so you don't get behind on, you know, assignments or tests, because life is busy. And when you have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 classes that you're trying to keep track of, so in that first syllabus week, when hopefully assignments aren't too heavy, take some time and just add these in. And then, okay, so I have a paper due, you know, April 30th. So I'm going to put a reminder in 2 weeks in advance so that I don't see it on April 30th. And then I'm like, oh no, I haven't started this 10-page paper. But I'm going to give myself a little reminder. Most, you know, iPhone, Android calendars, you can set like, when do you want to be notified of this event? So I usually do the day before and a week before, depending on, you know, how big an exam or paper it is. And I'm mindful of this, only talk and study for about 40 to 50 minutes. That's all your brains can really handle. And then take a 5 to 8 minute break. Set an alarm. Don't be like, okay, I studied for 45 minutes. I'm going to go on Instagram, because then suddenly like 2 hours have passed, or TikTok or whatever, or YouTube, wherever you spend your break time. Set an alarm, because you never want to look up and be like, 3 hours have gone by.
I do this all the time too. And like, I have this, like I said, I have the ADHD. So I go to school to do all my work, like down at the student veteran organization or building, the room. So I'll sit there, I'm the only one there, and it's nice and quiet, like, you know, white noise and stuff like that in the background. And I'm just relaxing, and I'll do 45 minutes. I'll go outside, smoke, go downstairs to the military resource center, grab some coffee, come back up, you know. So that works. That really does work.
And that's something I should have included and I didn't, but figuring out like, where do you study best? Like really like figuring out like, where is the best place that I study? And really, you know, finding those little areas, the library, or if that's too quiet, you know, the student lounge. But yeah, that's a really good point. So I am mindful of time. I just have a few more slides that are really quick, and then we're going to take a break. So we've sort of touched on this next one around some of the barriers to learning, you know, that are physical or mental or just learning, or, you know, sometimes those can be, if there's any, you know, mental health, any physical issues or learning, or, you know, that could be ADHD. And how do we sort of find, you know, solutions or workarounds? So if you want to go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. First, what can that look like? So that can look like procrastination, and in one of the meetings, someone mentioned productive procrastination, which I absolutely loved because I do it all the time. My apartment is never so clean as when I have something else I should be doing, like studying for a test. So thinking about like, both do I procrastinate, and then how do I procrastinate? Because that can sometimes get in the way of like, no, I didn't study for my exam, but look how I cleaned the whole place. It looks great. And then you have no mental resources left to study for that exam. You know, some of the barriers can look like if you struggle with procrastination or with motivation. So missing assignments, missing class, or if you're really irritable, that lowers our motivation. And leads us and if you're struggling with the material, that can increase our irritability. So like, what do we do with it if this is anything that we identify with? So the solutions, again, office hours. Professors are way nicer if they know you're struggling with the material and you're not just not doing the homework or the readings. DSS, at least in the places I've worked, I don't know every school around here, but they are lovely and really want to give you the tools to success. They can be really helpful in terms of getting professors to let you record the lectures, or getting access to the PowerPoint material beforehand, putting you in touch with tutors, the VA for any of those mental or physical concerns. We love to have you over there. Tutoring, and then student veteran organizations. Yes, disability support services is DSS. Nancy. Okay. I know I jumped very quickly through those last pieces, but I want to make sure I give you a break and I don't just tell you all the things to do without actually practicing them.
All right. So I just have to apologize. The way that my screens are set up, in order for me to see the slides, I'm going to be looking this way, which is not at the camera. So a little weird, but here we are. Okay, so for those of you who joined late, I'm Dr. Emily Mayer. I'm just going to be kind of piggybacking off of everything that Modi shared at the beginning. One of the things that came up as we were meeting to plan this was just this idea that no matter how much you are putting in the effort and no matter how much you know about your learning style and you're using all the tools and optimizing everything that you have at your fingertips and working really, really hard, you can, optimize your chances of success, of doing well. But no matter how prepared you are, no matter how hard you're working, there are going to be times when all of us feel overwhelmed, and times when no matter how well you're capitalizing on your learning style and using all the tools, you're just not getting kind of everything done that you want to get done, and life feels overwhelming. And I think this is especially true for student veterans who, not your typical quote unquote traditional college student. You have a lot of stuff going on in your lives and you're trying to balance a lot of different things, and that's gonna come into conflict with school. Kids, partners, births, deaths, the political climate, pandemics, distance learning, illness, all of these things are going to impact your experience at school, and school is going to impact your experience in these other ways. So we wanted to really spend some time talking about how to cope with this. And as we move into that, one thing that I want to just touch on and kind of call out from the beginning is what I am kind of calling the myth of balance. So just curiosity, anyone willing to share, how many of you have been told something like, it's just about finding balance? All you need to do is find the right balance. Yeah, so I've got one hand already. Modi, yeah. Anyone willing to share kind of how has your experience been of this? How's this gone for you? What is that balance? Have you found it? How's it going? I haven't. I can tell someone's talking, but we're not hearing, or I'm not hearing what you're saying.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Just talk like the work.
You might be better off typing it out. You're
kids.
breaking up, brother.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the audio kind of cut out again.
Oh, I'll
Yeah,
do that.
You might be able to
I'll
type it out, Roger.
Yeah, in the meantime, anyone else have experience with this?
I've had like the past 2 semesters, I had like a lot of challenges. Like Alex is aware of this, Micaela, Lisa, and a couple other veterans from Rick. Like I had a big move I had to do, and the landlord sold the house on me, and that threw a big monkey wrench in my studying and stuff like that. So I fell behind kind of, and like I had a lot of support through the SVO, so that's a blessing to me. But same thing like this semester, I got my car registered, and then I got all this good stuff going on. I'm on time for classes, and boom, my registration gets suspended. So I had to start taking the bus, which I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning because I live on the East Greenwich Warwick line, and there's like one bus that comes out this way. So I had to wake up at 4:30, and then it's like 4-hour commutes, like back and forth, So I mean, it's doable. I mean, I've done it, so it's just the hassle of like just trying to balance everything out, like how you was mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that part of why I take issue or have some kind of problems sometimes with this advice that people give of like it's just about finding balance is that it kind of carries this idea with it that like if you just prioritize right, you'll feel good and everything will fall into place. And I think if that's what we're telling ourselves, we're setting ourselves up to feel like failures. I don't know how many of you have heard, there's this story that kind of gets like bandied about like a teacher who comes into a classroom with a bunch of rocks and pebbles and sand in a jar and asks his students to fit the rocks and pebbles and sand in the jar. And it's kind of impossible. Like they try and they can't fit, and the professor or the teacher promises they can fit. And then finally he reveals, look, the way that you do this is first you put in the big rocks, then you put in the pebbles, then you put in the sand. And if you do it that way, it all fits because you got to put the big stuff in first. And this gets kind of like told as this story of like, if you just prioritize correctly, if you just put the big rocks in your life in first and focus on those things, all the other stuff will kind of fall into place, which is true if you don't have to catch the bus at 4:30 in the morning unexpectedly. And it's true if you don't have just objectively too many big rocks in your life. But I think where a lot of us have found ourselves, and again, especially like among student veterans where you have all this other stuff going on, you have too many big rocks. They don't fit in the jar, like even if you put them in first. And so that's what we want to spend some time talking about is like, what do we do in that situation and how do you cope with the real limitations in your life? And we're going to go through a few different, sorry.
I apologize if I may.
Yeah, no, please.
So also, I feel like, sure, once you find balance, it's all gravy. But like James said, sometimes you get a wrench thrown in, but also the chase of finding the balance. And that's something that I feel like it's never talked about. Like you're constantly trying to figure out what works for you. And you're not only wasting time, but resources. And you feel like you're just in an endless circle of repetition that you can't, and it gets exhausting because you still can't find what your balance is. And to be honest, in my experience, I've been at this since I left the military I was medically retired in 2013. And the first 6 months I thought, this sucks. Like I'm not used to not doing anything. And I started going to school and trying to find a balance, and the chase has taken me 6-8 years to finally bring me at Rick. I tried to be we were at one point a successful business owner. We got a wrench thrown in with Hurricane Maria. We revived the business. It goes back down because of COVID and then some earthquakes that we had in Puerto Rico. So now I said, all right, so let's go finish the degree that I started and never finished, and I found great things have happened in the last year, but it's a constant evolution. And I feel like there's never a balance. There's always a next step in your life that you're trying to reach. And I feel like dealing with how to not find the balance, but dealing how to do the daily things that get you to the happiness or what makes you happy is what's really important.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think so many examples in there of like how challenging this is, and how despite your best efforts, despite preparations, despite working really hard, things happen that are outside of our control that just kind of throw everything off. And that's another, I think, part of the myth of balance, is that once we find it, there it is, and we're like good for the rest of our lives. Whereas in reality, it's this constant recalibration and this constant like, and it takes a lot of effort to do that, as you're pointing out. And as we kind of move through this discussion, what I'll be using to frame what we're talking about here, to frame kind of how there are many ways to approach dealing with competing demands. And what I'm going to suggest as one possible way of thinking about it today is through thinking about values. And when I am talking about values, I want to be really clear about what I'm talking about here. So, you know, we might think about values as like, I really value my family. I really value school. I really value, you know, my military service. And that's all true, and that's all an important part of this. But what I'm going to suggest is that as we move through this, and I hope it'll be apparent why as we move through, that we think about values in a really specific way. So when I'm talking about values today, I'm talking about qualities. So I'm talking about things like respect, things like love, like persistence, qualities that you hold really important, like to you as an individual, the things that you feel like when you're your best self, this is the way you would want people to describe you. This is the way you want to think about yourself. You know, I want to think about myself as somebody who's honest, respectful, hardworking, this sort of thing. So values are directions, is another kind of way that I think about them. They're something that it's like if you think about directions on a compass. So if I value respect, I'm never going to like get to a point where I say, cool, I've achieved respect. I never have to think about respect another day in my life. I can like check that off my list. So values are really different from goals in that, well, hopefully I'm not checking it off my list. I don't know. Not something that I can just say, like, I'm done with that. I don't have to think about that anymore. And the like really positive side of that is that they are available to us in any moment and in any situation. So if respect is something that I really value, it doesn't really, I mean, whatever is happening in my life, whatever is going on, I can think about how do I want to bring respect into this interaction at home? How do I want to bring respect into this conversation I have to have with my professor? How do I want to make sure that I'm being respected? Because that's an important part of respect as well. And another thing about values, these are yours alone. So we get a lot of messages kind of from society, from our parents, from our friends, from the military, about what we should value and what should be important to us. And I really want to challenge you throughout the rest of this presentation to think critically about what's actually important to you. Like, what do you really care about? And what do you want to stand for? What do you want your life to be about? Absent what everybody else says or thinks or does. And why are values important? Again, I hope this will kind of become self-evident as we move through this, but we're going to be talking about how to use values to focus, to clarify when things are overwhelming in particular, to prioritize, and also as a way of getting in touch with a little bit of like compassion for ourselves. Again, going back to that myth of balance and that idea that like, if I'm telling myself I have to do it all in all areas all the time, and I'm telling myself that means a very specific thing, I'm setting myself up for failure. Like there are too many rocks to fit into this jar. And I still want to feel like I'm bringing my best self to the different areas of my life that are important. And values can help in the moment figure out how to do that, like in a concrete way. But before we move into that, I want to spend a little bit of time actually, and this is going to be quiet but interactive. I want to do a values clarification exercise. So I don't want this to be really abstract. I want this to be like concrete in the sense that like through the rest of the time we have together today, you're able to think about like your specific values, what's important to you. And for a lot of us, this isn't something that we've actually sat down and consciously thought about, at least not in a very long time. And we might find too that you have kind of like your default ones that you go to. And I want to challenge you to go into this with like an open mind and really be open to the possibility that something might jump out at you that you haven't maybe thought about before. So I'm going to hopefully you all have a piece of paper, and I'll ask you to, okay, James has one at least. I'll give you a minute to find a piece of paper and something to write with. It's best, it'll be easiest if it's like a full blank sheet of paper, but whatever paper you have is better than nothing. You can even use your phone if you have to, like the notes or, you know, some sort of notes app on your phone. And I'm going to ask you to make this table that you see here on your piece of paper. So 3 columns. The first one, not at all important to me. The second one, important to me. And the third one, very important to me. So James, you're sort of my metric here. I can see you and you stopped writing. So maybe I'll give folks, you got it, all set. Give just a couple more seconds. And then what we're gonna do, Kim, did you have a question?
I was just gonna, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was just gonna go back on the stresses of school. In the last month, my husband was in the hospital, he had a seizure. Then after that, I had a stroke, and then my aunt was in a bad car accident. So all these things happened all at once in such a short span. And I am just like so overwhelmed, and school is so important to me. And I just turned 56, and I've been out of school for a college for like 30 years. So everything has changed so much. So I have like a double whammy, you know. I mean, it's I don't know how to manage all this.
Yeah. First of all, I'm so sorry. That is an incredible amount to have had to deal with in such a short, at all, especially in such a short period of time. And then in the context of trying to go back to school and, like you said, in a new environment. That's like a pretty excellent and extreme example of when there's just kind of like too much and the demands on you are much bigger than the resources that you have available to you right now. I think that I hope that what we talk about will be helpful. I also, it's not, you know, like, I don't think there's anything in a situation like the one that you're in right now that would feel like it fixes it, right? Because there's so much happening and it's so hard. And I really appreciate that you're here today and like showing up and clearly trying so hard.
If I may jump on this from a student perspective, I think going forward, it's great. Communication is key to be successful in college. I believe you have, what you're doing is extremely commendable, you know, at your age, and professors would definitely identify with you. I have a professor who has a kid who has MS and has mobility issues, and he understands that I have mobility issues and how I struggle. So I think setting expectations for professors since day one would definitely help you navigate and be successful, because to my surprise, classes end, let's say on the 20th, but grades are not due until the 8th of the next month. So they're like, turn it in by the 7th, and they keep following up on you. And even if they don't follow up on you, but you know you have now an extra 2 weeks to finish something to try to get the best grade that is possible. And then also setting up expectations since the beginning, even if they tell you, you know what, tough luck, everybody else doesn't get the same thing. Then you know, you already know what the situation is, and early on in your semester you can escalate to disability services office or student any student resource that's available to you, and then you know how to navigate and you have a better understanding, because sometimes it's easy for us to just say, you know what, I need to suck it up and not look for help, or I waited too long. It's never too long. Like, I don't know about other colleges in Rhode Island. I know I can talk about Rick, and the day the class finishes is not always when the grades are due, especially for the fall semester, because classes end like the 12th or the 14th, and I think they told me until the 7th that grades weren't due. So there's if they understand, if they relate, and you set expectations from the beginning, you will be able to potentially get the extra help that you need. So when situations like this do happen, because we have responsibilities, we have kids, we have husbands, wives, then they know, and you know, they can adjust, and they're always not expecting that something bad is going to happen, but when it happens, it's not a surprise to them, and they can help you navigate that issue, give you more time, or help you understand better the material.
I think that is incredibly helpful advice, Alex, and I would echo everything that you shared. Thank you for sharing that.
Also with that, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. All right. Oh, sorry. But yeah, like even with like your military resource center at your school, you know what I mean? Like you would not believe how much help I've gotten. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, a lot of the people from Rick can attest to it. I don't like asking for help. I'm like very stubborn and stuff like that. And like Lisa's like, she deserves an award for like all the stuff she does for us over there at Rick. You know what I mean? And like, you know, it's you have to reach out to your battle buddies. You know what I mean? It sounds like cliche and stuff like that, but like, you know, like Alex, he's like a big mentor towards me. He's younger than me. I think he's younger than me, but he's a mentor to me. You know what I mean? And he's gonna be leaving this semester, after this semester, and it's gonna be a void. It's gonna be in my life. You know what I mean? But you gotta build those relationships like that in school, like, you know what I mean? Because that's what's gonna help you out as your fellow veterans. You know what I mean? They can direct you to like the resources you need. You know?
Yeah, I think, and this is an example of one of those times where it is not a time to be, as you said, James, kind of like just going through it alone and not taking advantage of resources and support and the friendships and whatever it might be that are available to you, which I would encourage everybody to do, especially in these times of like high stress. And then the other thing that I heard you say that I think I just want to touch on is like, that you care so much about school and you really care about being a good student. And I think some of this sometimes is about like having the flexibility to think about what does that mean to be a good student and how can I be a good student in the context that I'm in right now. And that might mean asking for extra time. That might mean going and getting extra help like that. You know, maybe we have this idea of being a good student as never asking for help and completing everything on time and getting straight A's and all of these things. And at this phase of life, this whatever's happening right now, maybe being a good student means something slightly different. And I think that's important to keep in mind as well. I'm going to move us along just for time. And I hope that some of the stuff that we cover will be helpful here as well. So you have your 3 columns, and what we're going to do is go through basically a series of values, and I'll show you with this first example here what it looks like. So each slide will have just one value. It'll be written up here. I'll also read it out loud, and we'll spend just a few seconds on each slide. And as quick as you can, try not to overthink it. Just put the first word there. So in this case, it would be acceptance into one of the columns. So with each one, you're going to say, this is not important to me, or very important to me. And I'm going to move through it pretty quickly, partially on purpose, because I don't want you to overthink it. If you miss something, it's not that big of a deal. Don't beat yourself up. There are a lot of values here. And this is always something that you can come back to. So starting here with acceptance, to be open to and accepting of myself, others, life, etc. Autonomy, to be self-determined and independent. Caring, to take care of others. Challenge, to take on difficult tasks and problems. Compassion, to feel and act on concern for others. Contribution, to help, assist, or make a positive difference to others. Cooperation, to work collaboratively with others. Creativity, to be innovative and original. Courage, to be brave, to persist in the face of fear, threat, or difficulty. Dependability, to be reliable and trustworthy. Equality, to treat others as equal to myself and vice versa. Flexibility, to adjust and adapt readily to challenging or new circumstances. Forgiveness, to be forgiving toward myself and others. Fun, to seek, create, and engage in fun-filled activities, and then to play and have fun. Little typo there, sorry. Generosity, to give what I have to others. Gratitude, to be grateful for and appreciative of the positive aspects of myself, others, and life. Health, to prioritize my physical well-being. Honesty, to be honest, truthful, and sincere with myself and others. Hope, to maintain a positive and optimistic outlook. Intimacy, to open up, reveal, and share myself, emotionally or physically, in my close personal relationships. Justice, to promote fair and equal treatment for all. Knowledge, to learn and contribute valuable knowledge. Love, to give love to others, to show love and affection to myself and others. Mindfulness, to live conscious that should say consciously, to live consciously and mindful of the present moment. Openness, to be open to new experiences, ideas, and options. Persistence, to continue resolutely despite problems or difficulties. Reciprocity, to build relationships in which there is a fair balance of giving and taking. Respect, to be respectful towards myself and others, to be polite, considerate, and show positive regard. Responsibility, to be responsible and accountable for my actions. Service, to be useful and of service to others. Trust, to be trustworthy, loyal, faithful, and reliable. Okay, so that's our last one. And now there are more, but you know, already running behind schedule here. So what I'm going to ask you next to do is, first of all, cross off everything that's not important to you. You can forget about that column for now. And what I'm going to ask you to do is try and narrow it down. And this probably sounds really hard because if you're like most people, you have like the vast majority of the things that I said in the important to me and very important to me column. But to go ahead and try to narrow this down to 5 to 10 values that are like the most important to you. What I'll ask you to do is look back at your list. You might find that there are some that are actually, you feel like they're kind of similar to each other. You can cross one off. For example, you might feel like, let's see, like respect and was trustworthiness one of the ones that we did, are like kind of similar to each other, or one could be kind of incorporated into another. So cross one of them off. And when you do this, look at your important to me list and your very important to me list. Because again, there might be duplicates there, and you might find that some of them that are important to you are actually very different from the ones that are very important to you, but they really matter, if that makes sense. And it's okay to move them around a bit. And the goal, you know, it's not an exact science here, but just trying to narrow it down to like 5 or 10, between 5 and 10 values. And I'll give you, I'm sorry, just like a few more seconds. And if you need more time with this, please take it either as we are continuing to talk or when we wrap up. And normally I would stop and ask for your thoughts and your reactions and kind of like debrief a little bit, but I'm not going to do that because we're pretty short on time. So I'm sorry, we're not entitled to each other's opinions. Now I want to take some time here and think about, okay, so like you have this list, hopefully, of values, and how can you apply this knowledge, which I encourage you to kind of like dive deeper into with more time when you have the time. But how can you take it and apply it when you're feeling like you have too many competing priorities and you're feeling overwhelmed? And so I'm going to suggest 4 kind of steps to doing this. And we're going to go through each one of these in more detail. But the first is to stop, to acknowledge that you're struggling. Again, we're going to talk in more detail about each one of these steps. The second is to check in with your values and to use them as a roadmap. And we'll talk about how to do that. Then, based on that, thinking about what needs to happen today, and perhaps more importantly, what doesn't need to happen today. Getting back to that idea of productive procrastination, perhaps. And then finally, and we already touched on this, but we'll spend a little bit more time on it, offering yourself some compassion. And again, that like recognition that I cannot do it all. And we're going to work through this with an example to hopefully make it a little bit more concrete. So say you have a child at home, your child is sick. They need a lot of care and attention. You also have 2 exams to study for. You have a friend that you know that you have been neglecting and you really care about and you want to reach out to them and you've been meaning to reach out to them for a while. Maybe they're struggling. As a result of all of this, you and your partner are fighting and things are not going well in that department. And then you've been neglecting your workouts and you're feeling like you really are neglecting your physical health and you want to get, both for your mental health and your physical health, you want to get some workouts in. And compared to some of the things that folks have already shared, these are pretty like benign, like not, you know, not even that stressful. And you can see how stressful this is. There are all of these things happening at once. Your family is putting a lot of demands on you. Your physical health, maybe you have like some chronic pain issues and you have exercises like PT exercises that you need to do, and that's really impacting you. You're fighting with your partner. You have this friend that you genuinely really care about. So your friends, your family, your school, and your physical health, these are all areas of your life that you care about, and they're in direct conflict with each other. Because you only have a few days, and how are you going to manage all of this? So again, the first step here, it sounds kind of obvious, but it's really important, is to stop and notice and acknowledge what's happening, that you are feeling overwhelmed. It's important to know how you know that you're feeling overwhelmed. You know, maybe you start to snap at everybody. Maybe you feel like your thoughts start to race all the time. Maybe you start to tell yourself, like, I don't have time for anything. I can't handle anything. Maybe you start to have a lot of negative self-talk. Maybe you start to forget things. So knowing, like, what is it about me? How do I know that I'm getting overwhelmed? How do I know that I'm getting stressed? What are the signs so that I can stop and I can, like, look hard in the face of what's happening? And then saying to yourself, this is really hard. Like, anybody would be struggling with this right now. We often tell ourselves in situations like this, like, God, what is wrong with me? Like, why can't I just like sit down and study? Why can't I just like get my stuff together and figure this out? Why can't I like be a perfect partner and a perfect parent and get an A in this class and make it to my job on time? But actually, when I say all about that out loud, like, that sounds kind of unrealistic. And so actually stopping to take a breath and acknowledge what's happening can be really important. And you might need to do something small to take care of yourself in that moment, and something that will allow you then to go ahead and make a plan to cope with this. So that might be going for a short walk, doing some deep breathing, playing with your dog for 5 minutes, listening to some relaxing music, having a conversation with, oh, I'm sorry, I switched too early there. Having a conversation with somebody who's supportive. But the important thing is you want to kind of like acknowledge what's happening and then reset your brain, reset your nervous system so that you can go ahead and actually cope with what's happening. So then once you've done that, once you've acknowledged what is happening, now it's time to check in with your values, your roadmap. So say you ended up, for example, with this list of values right here: trust, reciprocity, love, dependability, respect, flexibility, gratitude, honesty, and persistence. If we really think about it, I'm guessing you don't value these particular things in the same way in every aspect of your life. So for example, if we think about, we were just talking about how in this example, you have family that's putting demands on you, school, you have health, and you have friendships. James, you have a question?
I have a battle buddy that's here to pick me up. I have to leave, ma'am.
Oh, thank you.
All right. You guys have a great day. God bless you and your families.
You too. Thanks for your participation.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so part of this, and again, we would spend more time on this like individually if we had the time, but part of this is thinking about, okay, for me, how does this actually break down in each area of my life? So maybe in family and school, I really value dependability, but it's not as important for me in health and friendships. Or I really value reciprocity in my family and in my friendships. It's not as important for me with my school and with my health. And thinking about each one of these things in this way, in like a minute or like 30 seconds, does anyone, like, do you have thoughts kind of about like, how could this change the way that you're framing, thinking about like meeting expectations or doing a good job in each of these areas of life. How does this shift the way that you're framing that, the expectations that you hold for yourself?
In my, when it comes towards like me, I would say that every time I reach a goal, expectations and values change. And I've learned this kind of the hard way because it's something that I've learned that I constantly have to adapt and change my values based on what my goal is. For example, I wrote, like I listen to hope and I would love to be hopeful, but I've learned that hopeful is not a priority for me because for me, it's more important. I want to study law. So justice will help me get to my goal faster and it's aligned with what I'm thinking. Honesty is super important to me now because I don't have time to waste. I'd rather you tell me straight up, hey, or tell somebody, I don't have time to do this. We need to figure this out right now, you know, and not sugarcoat it. And contributing to not only my personal goals, but everybody else's while I'm trying to achieve my own goal. Once I finish law school, I'm pretty sure this is all going to change. So I feel like it's a constant evolution of learning how things will constantly change and be prepared for the change. I feel like once I'm done with studying in law school, then love will probably be the first thing on my list because I want to dedicate more time to my family and work and just kind of chill and cruise, and I don't have to worry about more schooling. It might not be that way. It might be different. So I think keeping an open mind and open expectations that knowing that this will change will definitely like help in the future.
Yes, absolutely. I'm really glad you brought that up. And it's a super important part of this, that these things do shift and they do change based on what's happening in your life, what like external kind of things are happening in your life, and also how your own growth and development changes. Like as you as a person kind of grow and evolve, these things can and should change, which is why it can be helpful to check in with them every once in a while, because we kind of get into these habits. It's like, oh, I'm like this type of a person, I'm that type of a person, I care about this, I don't care about that. When in reality, if we sometimes take the time to sit and think it through, it might be a little bit different than what we're expecting. And so carrying on with this example, how could I use this to kind of make decisions about this situation that I'm in, where I'm having like my family, my friendships, school, and my health are all sort of like happening at the same time. So I want to think about like what, based on my values, what needs to happen and what can I do? Not what do I want to happen, not what do I wish could happen, but what needs to happen in the next few days, and how can I do that in a way that's consistent with my values? So for example, my partner and I need to sit down and we need to talk. With family, I value love and respect. So how, no matter what this conversation is, no matter what the content of it is, how can I bring love and respect to that conversation? How can I also value reciprocity in my family. So how can I prioritize that? Can I talk calmly with my partner about who's taking the kid to the, hopefully not the hospital, the doctor. Maybe I really want to take my child myself, but I have these exams to study for and I can't. And maybe part of this reciprocity in my family relationship is letting my partner do that and letting go of taking my child myself. Maybe I need a minimum number of hours to study for these exams. And how am I going to communicate that respectfully, calmly, and with reciprocity to my partner, who also has a lot of stuff going on? No matter what's happening in my life, in my relationship, I can think about how to bring those values into that conversation, into that domain of family. With health, I said I valued persistence and flexibility. So maybe flexibility, I kind of mean that literally and figuratively. Maybe I want to be like more stretchy, but also I want to be able to approach my workouts and my physical health with some fluidity and flexibility. So maybe I'm changing my expectations. Maybe I normally have a 45-hour workout or like PT routine that I do 5 days a week. And this week, maybe what I'm doing is doing a 15-minute HIIT workout, or maybe I'm doing some restorative yoga, and that's my physical activity for the week. In friendships, I said that I valued honesty, dependability, and respect. So how can I be honest, respectful, and dependable with my friend when I don't have time to like have a 2-hour conversation that I know that we need to have? I can still show up for them. Maybe I can send them a message or like a voice memo or a quick thing that says, hey, I am thinking about you. I care about you. I want to be completely honest with you. I'm like maxed out this week. Can we schedule a time to talk in 2 weeks? Can we schedule a time to talk when exams are over? In a way that I'm still bringing that honesty, dependability, and reciprocity to my relationship. I'm still showing up for my friend. And I'm also balancing it with the other things that are going on in my life. And at least as important as these things is what does not have to happen. So maybe I really like to have a clean, to go back to our previous example, a clean and organized house, but was that on my list of values? I don't think it was. And so maybe I need to kind of let go of that expectation. And I think a big takeaway here is that this is not necessarily a comfortable process. So thinking about how to bring these values into each area of life and make decisions in this way, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to feel great, right? Because I really prefer it when my house is clean. But these other things are really important to me right now. And it doesn't feel good to like tell my friend, look, it's got to be in 2 weeks. It can't be today. And I'm still acting consistently with my values. And so this process involves saying no. It involves saying no to other people and to ourselves, which is sometimes a lot harder. Recognizing that this is possible or not possible in this moment, but also recognizing this is a moment. This is kind of like a slice in time. I'm really clear on what my values are and who I am and who I want to be in these situations. And I'm doing what I can to bring those qualities to each aspect of my life. We're already over time and I'm talking so fast. So I apologize for that. And finally, this kind of gets back to what I was just talking about, but the last step here, and perhaps the hardest, is accepting the decisions that you've made, like full eyes open. And that's the value of going through this process, is it's not just happening to you, you're making conscious decisions about how to respond to this situation. So accepting the decisions that you've made, accepting the consequences that come from them, and then offering yourself some compassion. Getting back to that first point there, you cannot do it all. It is literally not possible. There are too many rocks to fit into this jar today. And you are doing okay. You are living by your values. You are doing what you can to cope in a really difficult and impossible situation. So again, I apologize for how rushed that was. I would have liked for this to be more conversational and have more input from you. I can stick around for a little while to answer any questions, or also questions about the first half of the presentation. But I also don't want to hold anybody to, I know we've been talking about it the whole time, I'm all busy, have lots of things to do. So also please don't don't feel bad about jumping off.
Yeah, the Zoom won't close. I left us some extra time just in case, but of course we are respectful of your time. So if you have to go, thank you for coming. I think I'm frozen. Thank you to Dr. Mayer and Dr. McDonald and to Dr. Brand as well from the Providence VA Medical Center. It's always nice to collaborate on these. This was such a great topic. I think the information was so useful, and I appreciate everyone who shared their resources, that you guys gave great tips and places to look based on learning style. So I hope that was meaningful for everyone as well. If there are other questions, please feel free to raise your hand, put it in the chat. I'm gonna turn the record off because maybe other people want to share stuff that's not recorded.